As we know, paladins do a lot of burst damage by utilizing their divine smites, especially when combined with a high volume of attacks from something like a fighter who also gets action surge to make this have even more attacks. So, in today's build, we are going to combine these into one very powerful burst character. Welcome to D&D build number 16, the Smite Knight. My name is Nathan, and I make these videos about Dungeons and Dragons once a week, uploading on Saturdays or Sundays. Sometimes there'll be a midweek bonus video too. But if there's at any point any questions you have about this build or anything else, please let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to answer them. Additionally, I have a spreadsheet of all of the builds I've made that you can find in the description of this video if you're curious about any of the other builds I'm talking about. And if you look on my channel, you should be able to find them pretty easily. They're all contained in the playlist. Now, this build in particular, we are going to combine an Eldritch Knight actually with a polearm with smites out of Paladin, as well as doing a little bit of cool tech with the Find Familiar spell to help us get secure advantage for the entirety of our burst round. So, once again, this is a Nova damage character, although they are going to have some good sustained damage per round after they've blown up their target. So, here is our agenda for today. I'll kind of introduce and talk about the build concept. I'll talk about level 1, levels 2 through 6, levels 7 through 9, levels 10 through 13, and levels 14 through 17 before summarizing. And each of our key thresholds, so level 6, level 9, level 13, and level 17, I will do a damage report and kind of talk about the tactics that this character will use and the kind of damage numbers they can output. All right, so let's jump in and talk about our build concept. What is this build feature? So, you are going to be a durable and deadly melee build capable of some pretty devastating burst damage. We are going to be able to have pretty effective reach with our polearm, although we will need to close to within 5 feet during our burst round. This build is also going to be capable of pretty solid damage per round, even when we've depleted most of our burst resources, just to the way our level spread is going to be and how some of our feats and features work together. This build also has reasonable support and exploration capabilities, even when they're pretty much out of their spell slots and that kind of thing. And this build is also a pretty fun combination of martial and spell casting abilities. You're going to be pretty potent in terms of your martial ability, but you're not going to have very high level spells. But the ones that you have are going to be, you're going to have a lot of utility and things that you can do outside of combat, as well as pretty efficient and effective low-level spells. This build is also going to be pretty loaded with cantrips. I think you'll have 9 to 10 by the end. So, for this build, you'll need the Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. All right, so at level 1, we are starting in Fighter. And as I said in the intro, Fighter is actually going to be the main class of this build. We're actually going to have more levels in Fighter at any time than any of our other class levels. And at least half of this class's levels at any given point are going to be in Fighter. Now, as a first level fighter, we get proficiency with all armor as well as shields, and simple and martial weapons, as well as strength saves and constitution saves. We also get the second wind feature, which once per short rest lets us roll a d10 and recover number of hit points equal to our roll plus our fighter level. And then we also get our fighting style here. Now, there's a lot that you can pick from, but the one I'm going to take is Superior Technique. This is an option that was added in Tasha's. You get to learn one maneuver off the Battlemaster list, and you get 1d6 to use that maneuver with as your superiority dice, and you get your superiority dice back on a short rest. We're going to take the Trip Attack maneuver. What this one does is when we hit an enemy with an attack, we can force them to make a strength save. The DC is going to be based on our strength or dexterity, whichever is higher. I think they have to be larger or smaller, but if they fail their save, they fall prone. And we will use this to help us secure advantage for our burst round. Now, in terms of our race, I am picking Variant Human once again. And the reason for this is because Variant Humans get an extra feat at first level. Because this is a weapon-focused build as well as a multi-class build, you're going to want to get your weapon feats online as soon as possible to make sure the character is effective at all stages, and in my opinion, Variant Human is going to be the best way to do this. You could also use Custom Lineage. or honestly any other race. You can pick your favorite. If you don't take variant human or custom lineage, you will delay your feat progress, and that will be a big deal in terms of um, your damage per round, especially at the low levels, and also helps a lot with burst. So if you want to use a different race, it can be more effective if you're starting at a higher level. But you have to consider whether the features that you get from your other uh, race choice are worth missing out on an extra feat. In terms of our stats, we're using the point buy method as always. I'm going to start with a 15 in strength, putting one of our +1s there, a 15 in constitution, putting our other +1 there, and then a 10 wisdom and a 14 charisma. Now, you don't need a 14 charisma. We actually need 13 minimum for this build. If you wanted to boost some of your stats in other areas, you could potentially drop your constitution to 14, that kind of a thing. But for this build, I kind of like the idea that this character might be a little more persuasive and have a little bit higher, charisma for those social situations. As this character is going to be kind of an interesting mix of Eldritch and Holy Magic. Now, for our starting equipment, we want to take the items offered by our class. So I would go with chainmail, your choice of a glaive or halberd. I like the way glaives look, so I would pick one of those. Then you can get a shield and some hand axes. And along the way on your journey, you'll probably want to acquire a holy symbol and maybe a component pouch. You can always wear the holy symbol on yourself. For the kind of background and story of this character, I envision, we are potentially some kind of prodigy when it comes to fighting and that kind of thing. We've got some innate skill with a polearm. Perhaps we were trained as an early age. And this character also has some kind of innate skill with magic, although they may not be sure where it's coming from at these early levels. All right, at level 2, we are a fighter 2, and we get the action surge feature. This is a super powerful feature, especially for any character that wants to do burst damage like this character will. What this does is once per short or long rest, we can get an extra action on our turn and get all the benefits thereof. So if we eventually acquire the extra attack feature and we attack again, we can make all of our attacks. So this is a super powerful feature, again, for any burst character, and it's just very powerful overall. At level 3, we are a fighter 3, and we get our martial archetype. And we are going with the Eldritch Knight for the first time. The Eldritch Knight gets a couple things. They get spellcasting and a feature called Weapon Bond. What Weapon Bond does is it lets you bond with a couple of weapons, and you can't be disarmed of these weapons, and you can use a bonus action to summon them to your hands. Cool thing in that you can't be disarmed, and also some pretty powerful feature for roleplay, and that, if you need to, say, go into a party, you can leave your weapon at home or back in your camp, and then if a fight breaks out, you can just summon it to your hand. You can also do some interesting stuff with throwing with this if you don't have a weapon that returns automatically. But for this character, it's more of a ribbon feature. Now, the Eldritch Knight's specialty among the fighter subclasses is actually being a caster and getting some spell slots. So, as an Eldritch Knight, we get to learn 2 cantrips. I would take Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. These are the core melee cantrips, and we can use them instead of, well, we probably wouldn't be using them instead of attacks at this level because we have Polearm Master. These are good things to have around, and we will be using them later. We also get 2 spell slots of first level, and we get to learn 3 spells. Now, Eldritch Knights in particular have some limitations on these spells that they can get. So they use spells off the wizard list, and at first level, of the 3 spells that we know, one of them can be from any school of magic, but the other 2 have to be from the abjuration or evocation schools. So the spell I'm going to take from any school is going to be Find Familiar, and then our other 2 are going to be Shield and Absorb Elements. Find Familiar is a really cool spell, and on this character, we're probably going to be using an Owl Familiar, which has a feature that lets it avoid provoking opportunity attacks when it moves out of an enemy's reach. So our general tactic with the Owl Familiar is going to be to have it fly in and take the help action, which will give us advantage on one of our attacks, and then, fly out of the enemy's reach so it doesn't get killed. And we're going to be using this tactic to help us get advantage on the first attack on each of our turns. At level 4, we are a 4th level fighter, and we get our first ability score increase or feat beyond the one that we got for free. And we're going to take Great Weapon Master. What this does is, if we're using a heavy 2-handed weapon, we can choose to take a -5 penalty to the attack roll to get a +10 bonus to the damage roll, and we have to decide this before we roll the dice. Importantly, this applies to all the attacks that we make with our glaive, including the bonus action halved attack, because that attack still carries the properties of your weapon. This will let us do a lot of damage, and as long as we have a reliable source of advantage, we can actually output pretty darn good damage with this. We also get an additional first level spell slot here, and we get to learn a 4th spell. I would take Magic Missile on this character. This is a nice spell to help finish off enemies, and importantly, it doesn't use your spellcasting attribute at all, which for us is intelligence, and I dumped that stat. So of the spells that we take from our Eldritch Knight, we are not going to be using any ones that require any kind of save or attack roll. And this is probably the best spell if you your casting stat is bad. At level 5, we are a fighter level 5, and we get the extra attack feature. So now we can take 2 attacks instead of 1 when we take the attack action on our turn. And importantly, if we action surge, we'll get to make 2 attacks with that extra action as well. So we can potentially make 5 attacks on 1 turn now, 4 from our actions, and then 1 from our bonus action halved attack. Also, the power of our cantrips goes up here, so if we do make an attack with Booming Blade, it will deal an extra d8 damage on hit. All right, and at level 6, we're going to take our first multi-class dip. We are going to take a level in Warlock, and as a first level Warlock, we get our patron immediately, and we are going to take the Hexblade. This gives us the Hexblade's Curse feature, which is actually the reason why I'm taking this multi-class. This gives us a once per short rest ability where we can mark our target. Whenever we damage them, they take extra damage equal to our proficiency bonus, and we can crit them on a 19 or a 20 with an attack roll. And then if they die, we recover hit points equal to our charisma modifier plus our warlock level, which will only ever be 3. We're not taking any extra levels in this class. We also get the Hex Warrior feature, which gives us proficiency with martial weapons, medium armor, and shields. And also lets us potentially bond with a weapon that's one-handed to use our charisma modifier instead of our strength or dexterity to attack with it. And we are not going to be using this feature. We're here for Hexblade's Curse. We also get the Pact Magic feature, which is the Warlock version of spellcasting. So we get an extra first level spell slot that will come back on a short rest. We also get to learn 2 cantrips here. I would take Minor Illusion and Mage Hand off the Warlock list. We also get 2 Warlock spells. I would take Hex and Armor of Agathis. Hex just as that damage rider when we don't have Hexblade's Curse available. And Armor of Agathis is a good potential defensive spell if you need it. Now, because this build is going to be using Paladin, I've found that any build that wants to do smites, especially if they're attacking with advantage consistently, can benefit a huge amount from Hexblade's Curse, and just with the volume of attacks, the flat damage that we get from our proficiency bonus on each attack is really powerful. And overall, this dip is pretty insane because of how good this feature is. And if you've seen me use it before, this is why, and this is why I'm using it on this build in particular. All right, so at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. So what do our tactics look like at this level? So in the first round, we're going to apply our Hexblade's Curse to our target and run in and attack them a couple times. We'll probably have our, depending on how your DM does your familiar's actions, I'm going to assume that, that they act potentially after our turn, but ideally they would share our turn with us, which means you would have advantage on one of these. But regardless, we're going to have our familiar, they should be able to help us for when our burst round is online. So, and like with all my builds, I only allow myself a single round to set up. So while you could potentially deal more damage by applying Hex as well as Hexblade's Curse and then bursting on round 3 or later, I always limit myself to only a single setup turn, and Hexblade's Curse is going to be better overall for our damage than Hex. So at any point in the second round and beyond, we are able to do our burst damage. So we're going to attack with the aid of our familiar, which that attack will have advantage, and we're going to apply our trip attack. Now, for the sake of our damage calculations, I'm going to assume that the enemy fell prone, and whenever I've used trip attack on any build in the past, I've always made this assumption, so it's fair to make it here. And then once they're on the ground, we're going to make another attack with advantage. Then we're going to action surge, attack 2 more times, and make our bonus action half attack. And we're going to have our great weapon master on at all times for all of these attacks. So our numbers, all of our attacks are going to have a mere +1 to hit with advantage, thanks to the -5 penalty from Great Weapon Master. But each of our hits with our glaive blade will do 1d10 plus 16 slashing damage. So that's +3 from strength, +3 from Hexblade's curse, and +10 from Great Weapon Master. These attacks will crit on a 19 or 20. Then we also have our glaive half attack doing 1d4 plus 16 bludgeoning damage, again critting on a 19 or 20. We have our trip attack, which we're going to apply on the first attack. So, against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 96 damage on average in our burst round. Against an enemy with an armor class of 15 and +5 to their saves, we would do 67.8 damage in our burst round. Now, compared to other builds I've made to this point, this is one of the best round 1 Novas I've had. The only ones that beat this are my Hedge Trimmer build, and that one, grabs enemies and drags them in spike growth, and there's basically no save if they meet the assumptions. And then this one also is behind my baseline fighter burst builds at this level, although I did pretty heavily optimize those baseline builds. They are pure fighters with variant human. Those builds do about 100 damage at this level against the low armor classes, but we are not far behind, and this build very heavily outscales those down the line, and overall is very powerful. Again, if you want to kind of check out how this build compares to other builds, the link to my build spreadsheet is in the description of this video. All right, at level 7, it is time for our next multi-class dip, and we're going to start taking Paladin levels. So as a first level Paladin, we get Divine Sense. This is more of a ribbon feature and lets us detect like Fey, Fiends, and Undead and that kind of thing. And we also get Lay on Hands. We have a number of Lay on Hands points equal to 5 times our Paladin level, and we can, as an action, touch a creature and restore any number of these points to it as health. And then we can also spend 5 points to cure a disease. Now, the cool thing about this that we'll probably use it for is an emergency heal. If someone is down, pumping just a single hit point into them will bring them back to consciousness. So you can act as an emergency healer when required, and you can also use this to top yourself or someone else off after a fight. And overall is a nice thing to have, mainly for support reasons. At level 8, we are going to be a Paladin level 2, and this gets us a fighting style. I'm going to take Defense on this build, and then, which boosts our armor class by 1. Also get Paladin spellcasting, and we get the Divine Smite feature. What Divine Smite does is when we hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, we can expend a spell slot, and if we do, we deal radiant damage to the target. This damage is equal to 1d8 plus 1d8 for each level of the spell slot. So a first level slot is 2d8, a second level slot is 3d8, and this damage caps at 5d8, which is a 4th level spell. Now, if you ever get spell slots higher than 4th level, you can still smite with them, but they will still deal that 5d8 damage. You also get an extra d8 of damage if the target is a undead or a fiend, so that will cap the damage at 6d8 against those kinds of creatures. Now, we are using this feature for burst damage, and this feature is pretty stellar for it, especially when combined with the expanded crit range that we got from our Hexblade's curse. Now, one of the cool things on this build is because our fighter subclass is a caster, our fighter levels will contribute to our overall spell casting pool. Now, in terms of our spells at this level, we are still a 2nd level caster due to the way that multi-classing spell slots works, so no extra spell slots. But we do get to prepare 3 Paladin spells of our choice. So 2 from our Charisma modifier and 1 from our Paladin level. You can honestly pick whatever you want for a couple of them, but we want the Bless spell as our core kind of concentration buff spell. Again, because I only allow myself a single setup round, and Hexblade's curse is pretty much the best setup we can do with our bonus action, we need an action concentration spell to maximize the benefit. Ideally, in a real game, if you can precast Bless, it'll be great, but otherwise I highly recommend casting this spell on yourself and some allies in the first round. It gives you a d4 bonus to all attack rolls and saving throws that you make while under its effects, and this is really, really powerful and quite effective, especially for our build where we're lowering our hit chance to get more damage. At level 9, we are going to be a fighter 6, and we get our next ability score increase our feat, and I'm going to bump our strength by 2 to 18. Now, due to the way that multiclassing works, we are now a 3rd level caster. So it's our fighter level over 3 rounded down, plus our paladin level over 2 rounded down. So that's 6 over 3 is 2, plus 2 over 1 is 1, for a total of 3. So now we have 4 first level spell slots and 2 second level spell slots, plus our extra first level warlock slot that comes back on a short rest. So at level 9, it is time for our next damage report. And what have we gained since last time? Well, we've gained Bless, so that's going to be an extra 2.5 to hit to our damage, to our attack rolls on average. We've gained Divine Smite, so now we have the ability to convert our spell slots into raw damage, and we've bumped our strength to 18. In terms of other features, we've gained Lay on Hands. We have a total pool of 10 points there, and we've also gained that fighting style for our defense. In terms of our tactics, we've changed a little bit. We're going to cast Bless and apply our Hexblade's Curse in the first round, and again, we have the aid of our Familiar. In terms of our attack pattern, we're still going to do the same thing. So trip attack with the help of the Familiar, 3 more attacks, and your bonus action half attack. But now we're going to be applying our Smite on all of our attacks. Importantly, if we crit, we get to double our Smite damage, but we are going to Smite all the time. So what does our damage look like now? Well, our 4 wave attacks now have a +3 plus 1d4 to hit with advantage, doing 1d10 plus 18 slashing damage because our proficiency has gone up and our strength has gone up. They crit on a 19 or 20. Our glaive haft has the same attack bonus, but a d4 instead of that d10, and does bludgeoning damage. In terms of our extra riders, we still have our trip attack, but we now have 2 second level smites that we can apply, as well as 3 first level smites that we can apply. So that is a total of an extra 12d8 of radiant damage that we've picked up just from Divine Smite. Now, importantly, this is going to blow all of your spell slot resources, and you may not have much left to defend yourself with things like shield or absorb elements. But the important thing here is we can make our target die, and the best crowd control condition we can ever inflict on an enemy is dead. So let's see just how dead we can make things at this level. So against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 182.4 damage in our burst round. And against an enemy with an armor class of 16 and +6 to their saves, we would do 148.7 damage. And we are now extremely powerful. At this level, the only other one of my builds that's ahead of us is my Twilight Inquisitor build, which is the round 1 pop-off Bugbear Paladin Gloomstalker Ranger build, which that one is really powerful and is the only build in the long run that will ever beat this one. But yeah, these numbers are incredibly powerful. I should say ever to date. I may yet make more powerful builds in the future. We will see. But yeah, I am very proud of these numbers. And compared to last time, we have gained 86.4 damage, or a 90% increase against low armor class, and 80.9 points, or an 119% increase against the higher armor class. So we've more than doubled our damage against enemies with high ACs. And this is largely due to Bless, but also to that massive load of radiant damage that we now output by dumping all of our spell slots. All right, at level 10, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a few caster levels to improve our spell slot progression and get a little bit of extra burst damage. So we're going to take a level in Sorcerer here at level 10. So as a first level Sorcerer, we get the Sorcerer spellcasting, and we also get our Sorcerer's Origin, and I'm going to take Divine Soul on this build. I feel like it meshes pretty well with kind of our flavor of this kind of magical soldier who has a little bit of holy power, and maybe they're kind of realizing that this comes from this innate kind of divine power they had within them, and it's just now manifesting at this point. We are eligible for this multi-class because we have at least 13 charisma, and as a first level Divine Soul Sorcerer, we get Divine Magic. So when we get our spells, we are able to take spells from the Cleric or Sorcerer lists, and we also get an extra spell that we know based on our the origin of our Divine Soul and its alignment. And we also get the Favored by the Gods feature. What this does is once per, I believe it's short or long rest. Let me verify that real quick. But when we miss with an attack roll or fail a saving throw, Um, what we can do is roll 2d4 and add it to the total, possibly changing a miss into a hit or a failure into a success. And I just confirmed this is once per short or long rest, so this refreshes on the same charge as our action surge and our maneuver and that kind of thing. Now, I haven't included this in the damage calculations, but this will make you more consistent, especially on landing that first hit. Now, in terms of our spells, we get to learn 4 more cantrips due to being a sorcerer. And the ones I would take are Guidance, which is a cleric one, which we're allowed to take because of divine magic. And I would take Resistance, which boosts saving throws, as well as Thaumaturgy and Light. These are all just utility cantrips, don't use our spellcasting modifier, and this is really what we want. Due to the way that multiclassing works, we are now a 4th level caster, which means we get an additional 2nd level spell slot or smite slot. And then we get to learn 3 sorcerer spells. One of them is exclusive to our origin, and that one is going to be Bane. On this build, I'm thinking our Divine Soul origin is lawful, which gives us Bane. We can retrain this spell down the road, but it has to be into a cleric spell. And then I would also take Disguise Self for kind of that out of combat utility, as well as Healing Word as another emergency kind of bonus action heal to get your allies back on their feet. Now, if your table allows the Silvery Barb spell, I would take it instead of Disguise Self. It is incredibly good, and if you're allowed, you should probably use it. At level 11, we are a 2nd level sorcerer. This means that we get the Font of Magic feature, so we now have sorcery points. The only thing that we can use those for at this point is flexible casting. What flexible casting does is, as a bonus action, we can convert our sorcery points into spell slots, or our spell slots into sorcery points. We can never have more than 2 sorcery points, and the highest level slot we can create at this point is a 1st level slot. And as an 11th level character, the power of our cantrips has also gone up, which means importantly, our Booming Blade attack cantrip now does an extra 2d8 damage, and so does our Green Flame Blade attack. Now, due to the way multiclassing works, we are now a 5th level caster, so that means 2 3rd level spell slots. Also get to learn another sorcerer spell here, and we can potentially retrain one. I would retrain the Bane spell into the Sanctuary spell, and I would also learn the Command spell as kind of a emergency control, that kind of thing. It's not going to have the highest DC since our charisma is only 14, but it could potentially work, and it would be a nice tool to have. At level 12, we are going to be a 3rd level sorcerer. This means that we get a 3rd sorcery point as well as meta magic. So meta magic is something that sorcerers get to kind of enhance their spell casting. We get to learn 2 options. I would take the Quicken spell. This lets you change the casting time of a spell from an action to a bonus action, and it costs 2 sorcery points. Then I would take Subtle spell. This costs 1 sorcery point and lets you basically cast a spell without verbal or somatic components, and can be very useful in the right situation. Now, the cool thing about Quicken spell is if we quicken out a spell, we can still use our action to make attacks, and we can also quicken cantrips. So now we can quicken a cantrip like Booming Blade instead of making our half attack for our burst round, which will get us a little bit of extra damage. Again, due to the way that multiclassing works, we are now a 6th level caster, so that means an additional 3rd level spell slot. We also can finally learn 2nd level spells, so I would learn the Misty Step spell off of the sorcerer list. At level 13, we are a 7th level fighter, and this means we get the War Magic feature out of Eldritch Knight. What this does is, if on our turn we cast a cantrip as part of our action, we can make a single weapon attack as a bonus action. Now, we are not going to be using this. The damage per round of just making attacks, and our half attack is generally going to be better. And so this feature isn't really useful on this build, although for other builds it can actually be pretty good. We also get to learn a 2nd level spell here off of the wizard list, but again, it must come from the Abjuration or Evocation schools of magic. So I'm going to take Warding Wind. This kind of generates this swirling vortex around you that kind of can block range attacks and that kind of thing. Pretty useful for defense in the right situation. And we're not going to take any of the evocation spells because they would use our intelligence modifier, and our intelligence modifier is bad. All right, at level 13, it is time for our next damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, we've gained favored by the gods to kind of help us with attack rolls and clutch situations. We've bumped up our caster level, so we now have 3rd level spell slots or smite slots available. And importantly, we've gained Quicken Spell to be able to quicken out, a booming blade on our burst round. Potentially, in a real game, you could absolutely quicken things like Bless in the first round if you needed to attack sooner, or quicken out a command and that kind of thing. And the utility of this cannot be understated. We have also gained a lot of various utility and support options in our teleports and a lot of the spells that we've gained out of Divine Soul. So, in terms of our tactics haven't changed other than in our burst round, we are going to quicken Booming Blade instead of making our attack with our Haft. Now, of course, that attack is still available on future rounds, and we will absolutely be using it for sustained damage because we don't have enough sorcery points to quicken more than one spell per combat, unless we spend a bonus action to make more. So, here are our attack numbers at this level. Our attack bonus has gone up by 1 due to our proficiency bonus, as well as our on-hit damage has gone up by 1 due to the way that Hexblade's curse works. But our smites, we're going to be applying 3 3rd-level smites and 2 2nd-level smites. So this is a total of 18d8 radiant damage that we're going to be outputting, and this is increased by 6d8 or 50% since last time. So, against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 235.6 damage. And against an enemy with an armor class of 17 and plus 7 to their saves, we would do 190.3 damage. And since last time, this is a gain of 40 to 50 points, or about 28 to 29%. And this is, a pretty substantial increase. The percentages aren't that high because our numbers are actually pretty high. But this is, very powerful, and this character at this level is very, very effective. Now, compared to my other builds, we are ahead of everyone except for the Twilight Inquisitor, which is the only build that we were behind last time. Yeah, I am very happy with where this character is, and we are very, very powerful, and we will only continue to grow. All right, so at level 14, we are a Fighter 8, and we get our next ability score increase or feat, and I'm going to take this opportunity to cap our strength. Now, for the remainder of our levels on this character, we are actually going to be taking Fighter levels to make sure that we reach Fighter 11 for that 3rd attack by the end of our progression that I look at, that is level 15. We also get to learn another 2nd level spell of our choice at this level, off the wizard list. This one can be from any school of magic. There aren't that many good 2nd level spells that don't use your casting modifier. So the one I would probably take here is Enhance Ability. This is a really good kind of utility spell in that it lets you or an ally have advantage on all ability checks with a certain attribute. So you can use this to boost skills in a clutch situation, or even boost initiative rolls, because initiative is a dex check, and this will give you advantage on that. At level 15, we are a Fighter 9, and we get the Indomitable feature. I don't really like this one. I've talked about this a lot, but what this does is it lets us re-roll a failed saving throw, and we must use the new roll. We can only use this once per long rest. The thing is, if you fail a save, it's probably going to be something that you would fail anyway, and rerolling doesn't necessarily give you that much chance of success. This is a feature they are buffing in 1D&D, but at least in the current version of the playtest, but for now it is not that great. Now, due to the way the multiclassing works, because our fighter level is now an even multiple of 3, we've gained another caster level. So we are now a 7th level caster, which means we have a 4th level spell slot, which we can use to smite. At level 10, we are a Fighter 10, and we get the Eldritch Strike feature. What this does is when we hit a creature with a weapon attack, that creature has disadvantage on the next saving throw they make against one of our spells that we cast before the end of our next turn. So what you can potentially do with this feature on this character is you can attack an enemy, and then you can quicken the command spell to potentially control them. A good thing to do, but we're not going to be planning on using this for damage, but it can be somewhat effective. Also learn another cantrip here off the wizard list. You can pretty much pick whatever you want, probably some utility thing of some kind. And we get to learn another 2nd level spell off the wizard list, although this one again has to be abjuration or evocation. pick whatever you want. There's nothing in particular that stands out to me that would be helpful for this build, but you may have other options on how your campaign is going. And finally, at level 17, we are a fighter 11. And this means we kind of get our capstone for this build, which is extra attack rank 2. So now when we take the attack action, we can make 3 attacks instead of 2. And if we action surge, that still applies to this. So now for our burst round, we're going to be able to make a total of 7, other hand, 7 attacks, which is a pretty big bonus. And the power of our cantrips also goes up here. So, our booming blade that we click in net will now do 3d8 extra damage. And we are not a higher level caster due to the way that rounding works with multiclassing. So at level 17, it is time for our final damage report. So what has changed since last time? We have capped our strength at 20. We've gained that 4th level spell or smite slot, and we now have 3 attacks per action for a total of 7 in our burst round. We've also gained Indomitable for that little bit of durability increase, as well as Eldritch Strike to potentially help with control when needed. In terms of our tactics, they haven't really changed other than now we get to make a total of 7 attacks, including that quicken booming blade, and we're going to smite on all of them. So our glaive at this level has a +6 plus 1d4 to hit with advantage, doing 1d10 plus 21 slashing damage and critting on a 19 or 20. And our quicken booming blade has that same hit to hit bonus, doing again 1d10 plus 21. That's actually slashing damage, and 3d8 thunder damage. We have our trip attack, and we have our 7 smites that we're going to apply. So 1 4th level, 3 3rd levels, and 3 2nd levels. So that's a total of 9 plus 12 is 21, plus another 5 is 26 d8 radiant damage that we're getting as extra. Last time, I believe we had 18 d8, so this is an increase of 8 d8, which is about 45-ish% that we've upped our radiant damage alone. All right, so against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 340.9 damage. Against an enemy with an armor class of 18 and plus 8 to their saves, we would do 285.5 damage. And since last time, this is an increase of 95 to 105 points, or about 45 to 50%. Now, compared to our other builds, we are actually ahead of the Twilight Inquisitor against the lower armor classes, but behind it at those higher armor classes. That's mainly due to the way that Polearm Master kind of interacts with hit chance. But overall, yeah, we are pretty powerful, and our ability to annihilate our target is, we're probably going to kill them, if not cripple them against even the strongest enemies. And I am very pleased at where this character arrived at. And, even when our burst is down, or if you don't want to go all out on your spell slots, you still have 4 attacks per turn between your 3 action attacks and your bonus action halved attack. All right, so it is time to summarize. What is the overall score of this build? Now, to get this, I take all of our numbers at all of our damage reports and I average them into one number. And for this character, that is a 193.4. And this is the second highest I have. We are behind the Twilight Inquisitor. That build scored a pretty ridiculous 205. But unlike that build, we are potentially a lot better once our resources are depleted, just because of our 3 attacks per action and of our various things. And we are also very tanky in heavy armor with shield and absorb element thing. So if I was going to take this version of the build to level 20, I would probably do another level in Fighter, so Fighter 12, and then another couple levels in Sorcerer to Sorcerer 5. This gives us an additional 2 feats. We could potentially snag something like Warcaster to make opportunity attacks with Blade, and potentially, some kind of feat like, say, Resilient Wisdom to improve our Wisdom saves, which are pretty important at high tier. Importantly, this also gets us 3 caster levels, which will make us a 10th level caster. So we will gain 2 4th level spell slots and 2 5th level spell slots by doing this. We also get to learn some 3rd level spells here. So we could potentially have things like Counterspell or Haste or Spirit Shroud and that kind of thing. Or even Fireball if you wanted it, although I don't think this character would want that. You'd probably want more of that self-buff type of spell. And we also have 5 sorcery points to quicken spells with, so we can potentially quicken more than one combat. Now, I want to talk a little bit about an alternate progression here, and this is for your first 13 levels going Fighter 11, Paladin 2. I would probably go Fighter 1 to 6, and then take your 2 Paladin levels, and then finish in Fighter. What this does is it gets us to that third attack per action by character level 13. And then the rest of the levels, you would take the levels to match what we have here in terms of our total spread. Now, this version of the build, you don't have as good spell slots early. You don't have that Hexblade level early. So your burst is a lot weaker. But that said, you do have a little bit better sustained damage because of those extra attacks that you get online sooner. This version of the build, I did the math on it, scores in at about 8 points lower in terms of overall score. So you're still a very powerful burst character, but you don't get that spell progression until later because of your delay to your sorcerer levels. Now, one thing I want to talk about a little bit with this character is overkill. I talked about this a little bit on the Twilight Inquisitor, but we have enough damage on this character that we can probably shred a lot of things pretty quickly and deplete a lot of our resources in the process. And so one of the things that you need to keep in mind when playing a character like this in any real game is how much is too much. And also, because Hexblade's curse doesn't transfer between targets, we are only, getting those super enhanced crits against enemies that we mark. And once they die, we're not as powerful. But that said, this build, again, we've got those 3 attacks per action. We've got the bonus action half attack. We still have our familiar to give us advantage on the first attack each turn, even if, we don't have our trip attack for the follow-ups. And so, in a real game, you probably might not be burning, all 7 of your spell slots. But when you need to, you can. And that's something that's really powerful and I think would be fun to play about this character. Now, one thing here that I want to discuss a little bit is a question that I've kind of posed to myself, and which is more effective at dealing burst damage. A fighter with paladin levels like this character, or a paladin with fighter levels. And I think in terms of raw burst damage, I actually like the fighter with the paladin levels a lot better. Just because as long as we can get to fighter 11 and get that third attack, that is a lot of smites that we can potentially output. Now, the paladin with fighter levels, you're going to probably be better defensively, and you'll have a little bit better spell casting progression, and you're kind of free to use a different fighter subclass. If you're going to be mainly fighter with a little bit of paladin, you probably want to use Eldritch Knight just so you get those extra caster levels. That's 3 caster levels that this build has that a normal heavy fighter investment wouldn't have. So if you use a different fighter subclass like Battle Master, say, you would only be a 4th level caster by the end of this build, which means you wouldn't even have 3rd level smite slots. And we are a 7th level caster, potentially a 10th level caster if you make it all the way to level 20. All right, and another thing, again, I like about this character is we are still pretty darn effective after our long rest resources, aka our spell or smite slots, are depleted, because a lot of our resources come back on a short rest. This includes our trip attack, our favored by the gods, and our action surge. So we are still pretty effective even if we have to, burn our load early in the day to kill a dangerous enemy. Another thing I want to talk about here is a combo I didn't mention, but this character can actually use really well, and that is Magic Missile plus Hexblade's Curse. Now, because Hexblade's Curse applies the damage each time we damage the target, this will mean that Magic Missile, which normally does 1d4 plus 1 damage per missile, would do 1d4 plus 1 plus our proficiency bonus per missile. So way back at level 6, a single casting of Magic Missile on average would do about 26 damage with no, attack roll or anything. And on average, this is barely, I think it's a couple points on average lower damage against an enemy with a high armor class than our 2 attacks. And so this is a really cool option that you have, especially against an enemy that has a ridiculous AC that you might have trouble hitting. You can use this to do pretty good burst damage to them, and it doesn't scale insanely well with your higher level spell slots, but it is a good way to put in reliable damage. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if there's any of the builds I mentioned that you want to check out again, please look at the channel or use the links on the spreadsheet in the description. But I thought overall this combination of Eldritch Knight with our Paladin Divine Smites, as well as our nice Owl Familiar to help us set up advantage on all of our attacks, just works so well. And Variant Human, I think, the Human Fighter is actually really effective just because of that extra feat progression. So, again, my name is Nathan. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.